When most people think of Delta Force, they picture helicopters lifting off at night, infrared lasers cutting through darkness, and assault teams breaching doors in seconds. That image isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. Long before a raid force fast ropes onto a rooftop, someone has already been watching, measuring, mapping, living near the target. That invisible layer of preparation is known as Advanced Force Operations, or AFO, and it represents one of the most important evolutions in modern special operations. To understand AFO, you have to go back to the origins of the unit itself. Delta Force was created in the aftermath of the failed 1980 Iranian hostage rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw. The disaster exposed weaknesses in inter-service coordination and the lack of a dedicated counterterrorism strike unit within the United States military. In response, the Army established 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta under the broader umbrella of what would become the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC. The mission was clear: conduct high-risk counterterrorism operations worldwide. In its early years, Delta Force focused heavily on direct action capabilities, hostage rescue, aircraft assaults, and surgical strike missions. But, from the beginning, leaders understood that no raid succeeds without preparation. Intelligence was not an accessory to the mission. It was the mission. Inside Delta, a specialized element emerged, often referred to as Operational Support Troop, or OST. These operators were not the ones kicking doors on target night. They were the ones going in early, traveling commercially, renting apartments, establishing surveillance positions in cities where official U.S. military presence would have been politically impossible. The concept was simple but revolutionary for a military unit: operate like intelligence officers when necessary. During the 1980s and 1990s, Delta refined low-visibility reconnaissance missions in Europe and other regions where terrorist threats required contingency planning. One notable exercise often referenced in JSOC history was Jackal Cave, conducted overseas to validate Delta's ability to conduct covert reconnaissance ahead of an assault. Operators flew in under civilian cover, used assumed identities, and quietly surveyed potential target sites. They photographed rooftops, measured distances between buildings, identified guard patterns, and studied entry and exit routes. The exercise demonstrated that a military unit could operate under deep cover conditions, traditionally associated with intelligence services. This was the foundation of advanced force operations. AFO is not a raid. It is not a conventional reconnaissance patrol either. It exists somewhere in between. Operators assigned to AFO may deploy weeks or even months before a planned strike. Their mission is to prepare the operational environment. That phrase, often abbreviated as OPE, became central to how JSOC would operate in the decades to come. Preparing the operational environment means understanding every detail of a target location before committing an assault force. How many entrances does the building have? Where are the stairwells? How wide are the hallways? What are the guard shift patterns? Where do civilians congregate? Are there adjacent rooftops that could be used for escape? Is there a clear landing zone nearby, or will helicopters have to hover off-set? These are not questions that can always be answered by satellite imagery. They require proximity. AFO operators blend into the environment. They may pose as businessmen, aid workers, contractors, or travelers. They rent vehicles. They shop locally. They establish patterns that look ordinary. From that position, they observe. They take discrete photographs. They sketch layouts. They record timings. They watch for anomalies. The risk is enormous. Unlike assault forces that enter and exit quickly, AFO teams live in the area of operations. If compromised, they cannot rely on overwhelming firepower. Their survival depends on discipline, cover integrity, and calm under scrutiny. The 1990s saw further refinement of these methods. As terrorist networks became more decentralized, targets were no longer confined to battlefields. They existed in cities, apartment complexes, and commercial districts. Military units had to adapt to environments where uniforms were liabilities. By the time the 9/11 attacks occurred, the framework for AFO already existed. What changed after 2001 was scale. When U.S. forces began operations in Afghanistan, small JSOC elements deployed ahead of larger formations. Intelligence agencies were already on the ground, but locating high-value targets in complex terrain required integration. AFO teams were used to confirm locations, study compounds, and identify routes before kinetic action occurred. In some cases, these teams operated in extremely austere environments, coordinating closely with intelligence agencies and indigenous partners. The early phase of the war in Afghanistan exposed a critical lesson. Raids without precise preparation risk failure. Targets could slip away seconds before breach. Escape tunnels, unobserved back exits, and poorly understood terrain created vulnerabilities. AFO helped close those gaps. Operators would track patterns of life around compounds. Who came and went at what times? Did certain vehicles arrive regularly? Were there armed guards visible at specific hours? This pattern analysis reduced uncertainty. Instead of assaulting blindly, commanders could decide whether a target was present with higher confidence. As the war expanded into Iraq, AFO matured further. Urban environments demanded meticulous preparation. High-value targets often operated within dense civilian populations. Assaulting the wrong building could have strategic consequences. Advanced force operations became central to the targeting cycle. AFO teams might surveil a suspected safe house for days, tracking couriers and mapping associations. They would relay imagery and notes back to intelligence fusion cells. Analysts would cross-reference the information with intercepted communications and human intelligence. When the decision was made to strike, the assault force moved with a detailed blueprint already in hand. This evolution transformed JSOC's operational tempo. Instead of isolated raids driven by fragmented intelligence, operations became data-driven and synchronized. The raid was the final step in a process that began weeks earlier under deep cover. The significance of AFO lies in its hybrid nature. It combines military discipline with intelligence tradecraft. Operators must be capable of transitioning from quiet surveillance to rapid action if circumstances demand it. They must understand both tactical assault principles and the subtleties of blending into foreign environments. Importantly, AFO also introduced a psychological shift within special operations. It reinforced that the most critical part of a mission might occur long before gunfire. Success depended on preparation, patience, and information dominance rather than raw aggression. Today, the image of Delta Force as a pure assault unit misses this dimension entirely. The operators who conduct advanced force operations are not just preparing for raids, they are shaping the battlefield before it exists. They identify vulnerabilities, they expose patterns, they compress the time between detection and action. In modern counterterrorism and manhunting campaigns, the ability to prepare the operational environment often determines whether a target is captured or escapes. AFO ensures that when the door is breached, the outcome is not left to chance. The raid may last minutes, the preparation may last weeks, and in the world of Delta Force, it is often the unseen mission. The quiet apartment rental, the careful photograph, the measured rooftop distance that decides everything that follows. Advanced Force Operations is where Delta stops looking like a military unit and starts looking like an intelligence service with assault capability. The public sees helicopters and night vision. AFO is what happens before that ever becomes possible. It is not about speed, it is about patience, deception, and controlled proximity. And the operators who conduct it are not just shooters, they are observers, analysts, and sometimes the only Americans inside a hostile neighborhood weeks before anyone else shows up. The evolution of AFO accelerated after 9/11, but its DNA existed long before that. Delta's operational support troop had already been experimenting with low-visibility deployments in Europe during exercises like Jackal Cave, refining how to travel commercially, assume cover identities, and conduct close target reconnaissance without triggering diplomatic incidents. Those exercises were not academic. They were rehearsals for real urban counterterrorism operations in denied environments. Once Afghanistan opened up in late 2001, AFO became practical necessity. Early target packages were often incomplete. Signals intelligence could narrow down a district. Human sources could provide rough compound descriptions, but satellite imagery could not tell you whether the courtyard wall had been reinforced last week, whether there was a ladder leading to the roof, or whether a secondary escape route had been dug behind the structure. That information required eyes on target. In Iraq, insurgent networks were also watching. If a suspicious vehicle parked too frequently near a safe house, alarm bells would ring. AFO teams adjusted by varying routes, times, and posture. They assumed someone might be watching them at all times. But speed did not eliminate preparation, it depended on it. AFO enabled rapid exploitation. Once a raid occurred, documents, detainee interrogations, and captured electronics would identify follow-on targets. AFO teams could pivot immediately, beginning surveillance on the next node in the network, while assault elements reset. TTPs included low-profile communication, secure transmission methods were used sparingly, and information was passed in controlled bursts. Over-communication creates signature. Under-communication creates risk. The balance is deliberate. Another core tactic was escape route mapping. AFO teams identified not just how assault forces would enter, but how the target might flee. In Iraq, insurgent facilitators often use back alley exits or adjacent rooftops. Overhead imagery might miss these connections. On-the-ground observation revealed them. During several high-value target operations in Baghdad, perimeter adjustments based on AFO reconnaissance prevented escape through secondary routes that were invisible from satellite feeds. Pattern of life analysis became one of the defining features of AFO in Iraq. Rather than focusing solely on a named target, operators studied networks. Who met whom? Which courier visited multiple houses? Which vehicle appeared at IED sites before attacks? Following those patterns allowed JSOC to dismantle entire cells rather than execute isolated hits. This network targeting approach was central to the dismantling of al-Qaeda in Iraq's leadership structure. The visible result was high-tempo night raids. The invisible enabler was advanced surveillance and confirmation. Another important AFO function was pre-positioning. Safe houses for exfiltration, fallback rally points, and contingency medical access were identified before an assault force ever launched. If a raid encountered unexpected resistance or civilian complication, the options had already been studied. The discipline required for AFO is psychological as much as tactical. Operators must live in proximity to hostile elements without reacting impulsively. They may watch a target walk past them in daylight, resisting the instinct to act because the mission requires patience. That restraint separates AFO from direct action. In Afghanistan, terrain complexity added another layer. Compounds often had underground tunnels. Some high-value targets used rural safe houses connected by dirt tracks invisible to overhead sensors. AFO teams confirmed these details before Rangers or other assault elements moved in. Without that confirmation, escape was likely. The success of the later Iraq targeting cycle, often referred to as a find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze loop, depended heavily on the fix phase. AFO was that phase. It transformed vague intelligence into precise coordinates and predictable patterns. Importantly, AFO does not always end in a raid. Sometimes reconnaissance determines that the risk outweighs the reward. In those cases, the mission ends quietly. That discretion prevents strategic fallout. By the mid-2000s, AFO had become inseparable from JSOC's operational identity. It allowed the force to operate globally in urban centers without telegraphing presence. It shortened the time between identifying a threat and neutralizing it. It reduced collateral risk, and it demonstrated that the most important part of a mission might be the least visible. The raid is loud. AFO is silent. One happens in minutes. The other unfolds over weeks, and without the latter, the former becomes a gamble instead of a calculated action. That is what advanced force operations truly are, the hidden groundwork that turns intelligence into inevitability. By the mid-2000s, advanced force operations were no longer just a support function inside Delta. They were the engine that made the entire targeting machine possible. The public narrative focused on night raids, helicopter insertions, and high-value target captures. But inside JSOC, the understanding had shifted. The decisive phase of an operation was rarely the breach. It was the weeks of preparation that shaped what the breach would look like. Part of what made AFO so powerful was how seamlessly it fused with the broader find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze cycle that defined JSOC's evolution in Iraq. The find phase relied on signals intelligence, detainee interrogations, and human sources. The finish phase was the raid. But the most fragile link in that chain was always the fix, confirming that the right person was in the right place at the right time. Advanced force operations existed to solve that problem. In Iraq, insurgent networks adapted quickly. Safe houses rotated, couriers changed routes, phones were discarded frequently. If assault forces acted solely on intercepted communications, they often arrived at empty buildings. AFO teams closed that gap. Once a suspected location was identified through intelligence channels, operators quietly moved into the area to confirm activity. Their methods were deliberate. Civilian attire, local vehicles, movement that mirrored neighborhood rhythm. They might spend hours in a cafe across from a suspected safe house, blending into normal activity while observing entrances. They recorded when lights turned on and off. They noted which doors were used consistently and which remained sealed. They watched for armed escorts. They studied how quickly occupants reacted to unexpected noise. This was not random surveillance, it was structured pattern-of-life development. Every observation added context to the target package. For example, if a suspected bomb maker received late-night visitors who stayed briefly and left with bags, that suggested operational tempo. If a specific vehicle arrived before each attack in a sector, tracking that vehicle could unravel an entire cell. One of the key evolutions described in broader JSOC history was the shift from personality-driven targeting to network-driven targeting. Instead of focusing solely on high-ranking leaders, the force targeted facilitators, financiers, and mid-level coordinators. AFO enabled that shift because operators could follow links in real time. When one target was captured, exploitation teams would extract phone numbers, addresses, and associations. AFO elements could then pivot immediately, beginning surveillance on secondary nodes within hours. This agility transformed the pace of operations. Instead of weeks between raids, the cycle compressed dramatically. But that compression only worked because the preparatory reconnaissance was precise. If AFO confirmed that a secondary target was present at a specific house, assault forces could launch with high confidence. If confirmation failed, the strike could be delayed or redirected. Advanced force operations also evolved beyond purely urban surveillance. In Afghanistan, rural terrain required different tactics. Compounds were often isolated, surrounded by agricultural fields or rugged terrain. Operators conducting AFO in those environments had to balance concealment with mobility. They might work with local partners to access villages discreetly. They observed guard rotations from concealed vantage points. They identified irrigation ditches and tree lines that could serve as escape routes. Tunnel systems presented another challenge. Several high-value targets in Afghanistan used underground passages connecting compounds. Overhead imagery rarely revealed these features. Only close observation, noting unusual ground disturbances, airflow vents, or repeated movement patterns provided clues. AFO teams documented these details so that assault elements could block exits before breach. Another critical element of AFO was counter-surveillance detection. Operators assumed that hostile networks might also be conducting surveillance. In Iraq especially, insurgent groups learned to look for unfamiliar faces or vehicles lingering in neighborhoods. AFO teams mitigated this by varying routines constantly. Vehicles were rotated, observation posts were shifted, patterns were deliberately broken. The goal was to gather intelligence without creating a detectable pattern of their own. Communication discipline was equally important. Secure reporting methods were used sparingly to avoid signal detection. Information was packaged concisely and relayed through established channels into the Joint Operations Center. Analysts integrated ground observation with signals intercept and overhead feeds. The result was a layered intelligence product that could withstand scrutiny before a strike was authorized. As the targeting cycle matured, advanced force operations began influencing mission planning beyond simple confirmation. Operators' reports shaped entry techniques, timing, and force allocation. If AFO determined that civilians frequently occupied the ground floor of a building at certain hours, planners adjusted assault timing. If rooftop escape was likely, snipers were positioned accordingly. If guard shifts overlapped at midnight, the breach might occur at 0300 instead. The influence of AFO extended to post-raid exploitation as well. Once a target was captured, information seized on site could reveal additional locations. AFO teams sometimes transitioned immediately to monitor those secondary sites, preventing the network from dispersing. This rapid pivoting was a hallmark of JSOC operations in the mid-2000s. Importantly, advanced force operations did not always culminate in kinetic action. In some cases, reconnaissance revealed that intelligence was flawed. A suspected safe house might turn out to house a family with no hostile ties. By identifying that reality before an assault, AFO prevented strategic mistakes. This quiet cancellation of operations rarely made headlines, but it preserved credibility and minimized civilian harm. Culturally, AFO required a specific type of operator. The mindset was different from pure direct action. Patience outweighed aggression. Observation outweighed speed. Operators had to be comfortable blending into environments for extended periods, often without recognition. Success meant remaining invisible. As conflicts evolved and overt large-scale deployments decreased, the relevance of advanced force operations did not diminish. In fact, it expanded. Modern counterterrorism increasingly operates in politically sensitive regions where overt military presence is limited. AFO methods, low visibility, intelligence preparation, environmental mapping, allow options without immediate escalation. Strategically, AFO represents a shift from reactive raids to proactive shaping. Instead of responding to events, operators prepare the battlefield quietly. They reduce uncertainty before policymakers make decisions. They create options. The broader lesson is that modern special operations success depends less on brute force and more on information dominance. The raid is the visible expression of power. Advanced force operations are the invisible architecture that ensures that power is applied precisely. In every high-profile capture or elimination operation, there is a hidden timeline preceding it. Weeks of observation, dozens of log details, multiple rehearsals informed by real-world measurements. That timeline belongs to AFO. The operators who conduct it rarely appear in photographs. They are not filmed fast roping into compounds. Their work concludes when assault elements step forward. Yet without them, the assault might fail. Advanced force operations are the quiet calculus behind decisive action. They are the reason that when the breach charge detonates, the outcome is not guesswork. In the modern era of special operations, the most important mission may be the one that leaves no trace. The apartment rented under an alias, the rooftop studied at dusk, the escape route mapped before anyone knows it will be used. That is Delta's hidden side, and that is why AFO remains central to how the unit operates today.